What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Hopefully, you guys are handling your Monday a little bit better than yesterday. I know a lot of us were down in the dumps, myself included, after yesterday, a game in which I touted at the break as a game that was a must-win game between that and Houston, because you looked at our upcoming schedule and you said to yourself, well, we got to win these games, because then you got you got the Eagles twice, you got Washington twice, who's looked a lot better, you got the Cowboys, you got the Vikings, and you got the Colts. And I still think the New York Giants can make the playoffs, but obviously off of yesterday's result, it makes it harder, especially when you factor in some of the injuries that we're going to talk about in this video. And I had to stay off Twitter yesterday after the game because I knew it was going to be a madhouse. I needed to take a break. I needed to step away to really have a day to organize my thoughts and talk about the team going forward for the remainder of the year. And listen, I could come on here and tell you guys that no matter what happens throughout the rest of the year, this year has been a success. And at the end of the year, you may very well look at it that way. Going into the year, I thought the Giants would be a 7-win team. They're already at 7 wins. There's been a lot of encouraging signs for this football team this year for the future. Some of the things that we've been able to get out of a lot of the players on this roster that prior coaches weren't able to do. And there's clearly a sense of direction with this regime with Joe Schoen. But in the moment, the way that this team has started off, to start 7-2, I think you have to up your expectations for this year's team. By no means do I think this is a Super Bowl team. I still think there's a lot of growth that needs to come in terms of the talent acquisitions. And we have a ton of injuries going into this game. We have even more injuries going out. But going into this Lions game, I think most Giant fans had playoff expectations. 10 wins certainly probably is going to get you in. If we won this game, you start 8-2, a game in which we were favored, a game in which I still feel going in, had we been able to play the way in which we were playing, we should have won. And I still believe that. I still think we should have won this football game, and it's a disappointment that we did not. By no means am I trying to undersell what the Detroit Lions did. They played a really good game. They won up at the point of attack. But in a lot of ways, the New York Giants beat themselves. And sure, if you would have told me that Saquon Barkley was going to be held to 22 yards on the ground going into the game, I would have said, yeah, we're going to lose. But going up against the second worst rushing defense in football, I did not expect that. So my hats go up to Detroit. They came out with a good game plan, and the Giants weren't able to adjust. And obviously, we had 3 turnovers, and we didn't create any. When that happens, you're going to lose. Maybe a guy like Pat Mahomes could overcome that 1 out of every 7 or 8 times that happens. But I would say like 99% of the time that you lose the turnover differential 3-0, you're going to lose the football game. And people point to other factors, and there's certainly, I'm not trying to discount your complaints about the refereeing or the injuries or everything else. But in the end, that's why we lost this football game. The Giants can't afford to be a team that turns over the football. They cannot make mistakes. They cannot beat themselves. And while there were some questionable calls, the Giants beat themselves in a lot of ways in this game. And if there was a game that, and you knew there was going to be a stinker that was going to come sooner or later, this team can't play flawless football all year. But this was a game that we could not afford for that to happen. And now the Giants need to surprise, and they don't have a lot of time to do it. They got to get themselves off the mat. They got Dallas on deck with all the injuries that we sustained. Adoree Jackson, obviously being a big one, along with Wan'Dale Robinson, who looked great in this game. We'll talk about both of those in this video, about the extent of the injuries. I also want to talk about the topic of Kayvon Thibodeaux, because I feel like I went on Twitter today, and not that I was amazed, because I understand Giants fans are passionate. I also understand that Thibodeaux only has 1 sack this year, and a lot of fans will look at that. Not to mention he was going up against Aiden Hutchinson. Not that they play each other, but they play the same position. They're in the same draft class, and Giants fans saw the impact that Hutchinson had in comparison to the impact that Kayvon Thibodeaux had in this game. Of course, Hutchinson recovered the fumble, had the interception against Daniel Jones, in which he made a terrific play. And Thibodeaux, for the most part, didn't do a whole lot. Our defense as a whole didn't do a whole lot. We got run over. But am I even starting to worry even a little bit that this guy's going to be a bust? No, it's way too early in his career to come to that conclusion. Any player in the NFL could be a bust. Any player in the NFL could be a bust. But am I going to panic and start to say that I think it's going to happen? No. Like Chase Young up to this point, some of it certainly having to do with injuries, hasn't lived up to the expectations. So is it possible by year 2, year 3, Kayvon reaches that? I start to feel that way about him, sure. But year 1, no, I certainly do not feel that way about Kayvon. He's asked to do a lot more things than a lot of other players do at his position. He drops back in coverage. He's not used exclusively as an edge rusher to go after the quarterback. And he doesn't have his counterpart on the other side, Azeez Ojulari. If he was out there, things would be a lot easier. And he's a rookie. And I understand we're New York fans. I understand we're reactionary. But give the guy a chance. Michael Strahan, Michael Strahan, Jason Pierre-Paul, and Osi Umenyiora had a combined 6.5 sacks in their rookie years, if you combine all 3 of the rookie years. All of them took monumental leaps year two. JPP was a contender for Defensive Player of the year two, and he had a lot to do with why we won the Super Bowl. OCU Manure, I think, at double digits X year two, if not year three. So they started to really mature as players. But every player is different. Not every player is going to mature at the same pace. You got to give this guy more of an opportunity before we even start to take that approach. At least that's my opinion. Everybody can have their own opinion, but that's my opinion. And I think Andrew Thomas should have taught you that more so than anybody else. There was a lot of Giants fans after 4 starts saying that the guy was Eric Flowers. And now he turned into be the best left tackle in football. So I'm not going to panic about Kayvon Thibodeaux. I still think Kayvon Thibodeaux is going to be a tremendous player. I still think Evan Neal is going to be a tremendous player. They're rookies. They're in the NFL. They're learning. I'm going to give them some time to grow. But do I understand where fans are coming from? Sure, especially after yesterday's loss. You're going to get some overreaction with things like that. And he has not produced at the level that many probably expected in his rookie year, even though I do think he's done a lot more than just the sack numbers may indicate. I do think he has had an impact for this New York Giants defense, and I think he'll get better. Does he need to put on some more muscle? I'm sure he does. Does he need to develop more, pass rushing moves? I'm sure he does. So did OCU Manure coming into the pros. I remember he was a one-dimensional player, and he picked up things to his game, and he became a much better player because of it. So I am not even close to panicking or questioning the pick about Kayvon Thibodeaux. Still has a long way to go before I start to question that. He still has a whole new offseason next year to further develop as a pro, and I think he will. And I think he's going to be a very good player for the New York Giants for a very long time. That's still my mindset on Kayvon Thibodeaux, not changing that off of what many feel is a slow start in the NFL. It happens. Like I said, different players develop at different paces. Is it possible? Sure. You could certainly argue that it's possible. Like I said, any player could be a bust. Some of the guys that are thought to be the most talented players of all time could be a bust. But I'm going to give this guy a lot more time before I start to even question whether or not he will be. That's my thought process on the matter. I still think Kayvon Thibodeaux is going to be very good. And there's a lot of things about Kayvon Thibodeaux that I like more so than I necessarily thought I would going into the year. Seems to be a guy that is loved in the locker room. Seems to be a really good leader. Seems to be a guy, a lot of people question when you look at the scouting reports coming into the pros that he gave up on plays. I have not seen that. We saw Kayvon Thibodeaux chase a guy down 50 yards when he had a big run. I think it was Travis Etienne against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Guy doesn't give up on plays. The guy gives it his all. The guy has a really good motor, and I just think he needs further development from within the pros to reach what I think he will, which is going to be a very good edge rusher in the NFL. I've seen a lot of people frequently compare it to Micah Parsons and say we could have had Micah Parsons. And while I understand where you're coming from because you're watching Micah Parsons destroy it with the Dallas Cowboys, that's a new regime. This is a new regime, I should say. Dave Gettleman has nothing to do with Joe Schoen. You can't fault Joe Schoen for not having the wherewithal to draft Micah Parsons. He didn't have that opportunity. So I'm looking at like a clean slate. I'm not going to judge Kayvon Thibodeaux's success off of what we could have had with Micah Parsons. I'm not going to live in the past. I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to hope that Kayvon Thibodeaux could become a dominant force for the New York Giants at that position in the future. But I just wanted to briefly talk about that because I see a lot of people destroying Kayvon Thibodeaux on social media, and I understand it's New York. I understand there's a lot of pressure, but I am far from joining that mob. Much like I was with Andrew Thomas, I am far from joining that mob. At the end of the day, Kayvon Thibodeaux up to this point in his career has only played 8 games. He missed the first 2 games this year. He's played half of a season, less than half of a season in the NFL. Relax. That's my advice. Relax. Give this guy more of a chance before you start jumping on the he sucks train or he's overrated or he's going to be a bust train. That's my opinion on the matter. Maybe he will be. I don't think he will be, though. I'm going to give him a lot more time than this. Now we're going to touch on some of the unfortunate things and talk about whether or not this season could be in jeopardy. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, it could be. I touted this as a must-win game. We lost. We looked horrible in every phase of the game. We'll start with the special teams. The special teams was awful. Jamie Gillen continues to struggle in terms of punting the ball, and I understand the wind is a factor. Much like with Graham Gano, who I'm going to give a complete pass because Graham Gano has been one of the best kickers in football, missed 2 extra points. I do think it was wind-influenced. But the special teams was really bad. Really bad. The defense, and they didn't have a lot of help. Defense looked really good the first quarter and a half of this game, but the defense could not come up with stops when they needed to later in that game. And don't get me wrong. Obviously, the turnover by Daniel Jones, the interception on his own 20, that was the main contributing force why we gave up that touchdown. The fumble deep in our own territory, the same thing. So I'm not going to destroy the defense overall, but they didn't play good. We had no sacks. We had no sacks against Jared Goff, and they were able to run the ball, and they beat us up at the line of scrimmage time and time and time again. We couldn't get pressure on the quarterback, and as that game went along, we had a lot of trouble stopping the run. So we got out-muscled. It was very reminiscent of the Dallas Cowboys game. It truly was. Early on in the game, Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence were a factor, but that quickly wore off. Also the offense. Well, there were times I felt like the offense was clicking, especially that second drive. Daniel Jones looked great, and there were definitely some points in this game where Daniel Jones played very well. He, of course, was a big reason why we lost the game. You got to give the quarterback a lot of credit when we win games, and he's got to take at least some of the blame or a lot of the blame when we lose them. You can't turn the ball over inside your own 20-yard line. You just can't do it. And then, of course, he threw another interception later in the game. Are there points in this game where I thought he looked good? Yes. Do I think he was it should be the guy that people are destroying for this loss? No, I think there's a lot more to why we lost this game than just that. Bad penalties, bad offensive line play, lots of injuries from within the game. But he needs to shoulder some of the responsibility for this loss as well. And there's going to be games where that happens. You can't expect Daniel Jones to be perfect all year. It's just unfortunate that it happened in a game that I feel like we absolutely had to find a way to win this football game. Like I said, Hutchinson made a really good play on that. But Daniel Jones, even after the game, admitted he didn't see him in coverage. Saquon Barkley got stuffed time and time again. Now, whether or not you want to shoulder more of the responsibility for Barkley or the offensive line in terms of run blocking, that's up to you. He had 15 carries, 22 yards, though. That's not getting the job done. That's 1.5 yards per carry. Maybe some of you guys may want to attribute that to the previous week when he had 35 carries. Maybe he was a little bit, not quite himself going into the game. Or maybe a lot of it had to do with the offensive line. It was probably a bit of both. But regardless, that's not getting the job done, and Saquon Barkley would tell you that himself. So everybody was disappointing in this game. The coaching, at times I thought the play calling was good, but overall, disappointing. There was a couple of questionable calls that I talked about in my live stream that I'm not going to go into further detail. But I worried about going into the week, was this going to be a trap game? And I don't know. I don't know if it was or wasn't, but the team certainly didn't look like themselves. They certainly looked sloppy. And I'm not saying they overlooked Detroit, being that they had Dallas on Thanksgiving just 4 short days later, but at least it certainly gave off that kind of vibe. As far as the injury goes, I mean, it's unfortunate, and I think this is the first time all year you could really take a shot at Brian Daboll. I do. I think it's the first time all year where you could really take a shot at Brian Daboll, and that's going to happen. Coaches are going to make mistakes, and hopefully he learns and grows. He's a first-year head coach. I still think he's done a tremendous job. I still think he needs to be strongly considered for Coach of the Year, and I never imagined the New York Giants would be in the situation they currently are in, and he has as much to do with that as anybody else. So I want to say that. But his decision, at least in my opinion, and I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking. I talked about this the day that I heard that they were deciding to potentially do this, which I think was 2 weeks ago, to have Adoree Jackson returning punts when we're as thin as we are at that position, the cornerback spot, I always thought was a big mistake. And you could go back to the Jason Sehorn days when he got hurt, and a lot of Giants fans are going to point to that. And Giants fans that are upset about Adoree Jackson getting hurt returning punts, I think have a right to be upset. And I think Brian Daboll will learn from this. I don't expect him to do something like that in the future, especially being that we're so thin at that position to begin with. I just felt like the risk did not match the reward to have Adoree Jackson returning punts. And now the word came out. Let me just make sure I pull up the right one. That Adoree Jackson, here it is going to miss 4 to 6 weeks with an MCL sprain. This coming out from Ian Rappaport. Giants cornerback Adoree Jackson is out 4 to 6 weeks with an MCL sprain, source said. Rough loss, even rougher day for the G-men. And that's a tough loss. It is. I mean, we're already incredibly decimated with injuries in that secondary. Xavier McKinney hurt himself on a quad. Obviously, Aaron Robinson's been out now for the whole year. So the Giants were already really thin in that secondary, and that's only going to make it harder. And we're going to be going up against some very good wide receiver cores. The Eagles have a great receiving core. Obviously, Dallas has some weapons. You got to worry about Pollard coming out of the backfield as well. Washington actually has a very good wide receiving core. So, and the Vikings, I mean, with Justin Jefferson. So you look at some of these opponents we got coming up, and it's just horrible timing for him to go out with this injury. And Daboll answered it to the press, and I'm not going to kill Brian Daboll for his answers. I know a lot of Giants fans will. I'm not going to kill him for that. Even though I disagree with his decision, I want my head coach to be confident in the decisions that he makes. So I don't want him to backtrack and say, yeah, you guys were right. No, I want him to show confidence in the decisions that he makes. So I'm not going to kill Brian Daboll for his answers, but I do think fans have a right to be critical about the decision that he made to have Adoree Jackson returning punts. And maybe some fans will disagree with that. Maybe some fans will say it was just an unfortunate coincidence. I just felt like the risk did not meet the reward to put him back there returning punts. So it's unfortunate. Hopefully we could overcome it, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. When asked about it, this is what he had to say. When asked about the decision to have a valuable starter be exposed on special teams, Dable said he had no regrets about using Jackson as a return man. Look, it's football. Obviously, it was unfortunate, he told reporters. And it is football. And he may have very, very well gotten hurt playing cornerback. He has had an injury, history in the past. That's why a lot of us were worried when we looked at our cornerback depth going into the year. It's possible he would have gotten hurt in that game guarding a wide receiver. But I will stand by my point that I felt like it was an unnecessary risk, and he probably shouldn't have had him be the man that was returning punts. There's a lot of injuries in the NFL playing that position specifically, and to me, it was just an unnecessary risk for him to do it. So I'm hoping that Brian Dable learns from this, and luckily, this is not an injury as extensive as it appears Wan'Dale Robinson's is or Saquon Barkley's was, where they tore their ACLs, and hopefully Adoree will be able to get out here before the end of the year, and if we make the playoffs for the playoff game, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to overcome it. As far as the other injury yesterday, the big injury, and there were several other injuries, but in terms of the other one, a big note was Wan'Dale Robinson, who I was so encouraged by, and we'll talk about that more so after I bring up the injury. This coming out from Giants Wire. Head coach Brian Dable confirmed the worst on Monday, announcing that Robinson will miss the remainder of the season with a torn ACL. Robinson is the latest in a long string of injuries for the Giants this season, especially at the wide receiver position. He joined Sterling Shepard, who was lost in week 3 with a torn ACL. That also came at MetLife Stadium. And maybe it was the turf, maybe it wasn't. Luckily, we're changing that by year's end, but it's just so unfortunate. Wan'Dale Robinson was playing really well yesterday. He was actually the first Giants receiver all year to have 100 yards receiving in a single game. And I love the way that they were utilizing him in the offense, all the pre-snap motion, and it really started to show encouraging signs of what they were going to be able to do with him going forward. He looked really good in that game, and I even started to say it while we were doing the live broadcast, even before he caught a pass. I loved all the pre-snap motion and the way that they were trying to get him involved in the offense, and you really started to see the plan that Kafka and Dable were talking about at the beginning of the year or before the beginning of the year after they drafted him, that they had a clear plan for him in this offense. You really started to see that develop yesterday, and it's just unfortunate he goes down with the injury. Now the New York Giants are even thinner at probably the most thin position group they have on this roster to begin with. You got to figure Richie James will probably be the starting slot wide receiver and will probably take Robinson's role for the rest of the year, and hopefully he could do a good job. But it's just unfortunate for a guy that you want to see develop further as a pro. And it's entirely possible he may miss at least the first couple of weeks next year. Each player is different in terms of the recovery time. Sometimes it's 9 or 10 months. This is happening in late November. The season starts in early September. So maybe the timeline sets up where he may be able to go week 1. But even if he is, for a young player entering year 2, he's going to miss valuable offseason development with whoever the quarterback is, whether that's Daniel Jones or whether that's somebody else, getting on part, getting a good rapport with the quarterback, learning the scheme even better, developing more as a pro. So that's just a very unfortunate injury, and nobody's at fault for that. Injuries happen in the NFL, but it sucks because he was a guy that I really felt like was showing a lot of growth yesterday, and a guy that I was really looking forward to seeing further develop over the final 7 games of the season. But can't do anything about it. And that's kind of been the moral of the story with the Giants over the last 3 years. It's the next man up mentality. That's all you could do as a fan. And you got to hope these guys could step up. Is it a lost season? I'm not going to go as far to say that quite yet. But it's going to be hard. It's certainly going to be challenging. But it was going to be challenging at the beginning of the year. These Giants have proven a lot of doubters wrong. They're going to have to do that over these final 7 games. But when I look at it, I'd be lying to you if I thought we're going to beat the Dallas Cowboys. Could it happen? Anything could happen. It's why they play games in the NFL. But we don't match up particularly well with them. The Giants are going to have to come out with a masterful game plan, and Daniel Jones is going to have to play his butt off if we have any chance to beat the Dallas Cowboys on Thursday. After that, I think the playoff hopes will, if we do lose to Dallas, which I'm expecting us to, I think the playoff hopes are going to be in the balance against Washington. That next game, it's do or die right there. Giants got to win that next game against Washington while we're at home, especially being that they're going to have another week to prepare against us, the bye week, and then they play us again the following week. We've absolutely got to win that next Washington game. And then you figure we got to probably beat the Colts and potentially Washington again, unless we were able to knock off either the Eagles once or Minnesota once. But it's 1 week at a time, and we'll see how the New York Giants respond. But I'd be lying to you if I said that I think things look pretty. No, I think Giants fans have a right to be depressed off of that. In hindsight, at the end of the year, yeah, I'll look back and I'll say, yes, this was a very productive season in a lot of areas, but the playoff hopes for this team took a huge hit yesterday. in a game in which we absolutely needed to win, because you look around the league, Washington's starting to play a lot better. Seattle's on bye, but they play the Raiders next week. The Niners I think they play tonight. We'll see how they do, but they're starting to creep up in the standings. So the Giants are going to have to turn on the Jets, and it's probably going to require 10 wins to make the playoffs, the way that the NFC seems to be shaking out right now, if the Giants expect to be playing playoff football, which means they got to go 3-3 over their final 6 contests, 2 of which are Washington, 2 of which are or 7 contests, I should say. We have to go 3-4. 2 against Washington, 2 against the Eagles, 1 against the Cowboys, 1 against the Colts, and 1 against the Minnesota Vikings. And they're going to have to do it without Adoree Jackson, and they're going to have to do it without Adoree Jackson or Wan'Dale Robinson and several of the other players that have been banged up throughout the year. Hopefully Evan Neal comes back next Thursday, I should say. If not, I expect him to be back the following week, because that offensive line is completely decimated with injuries right now. You had Matt Parrott in the lineup yesterday. Nick Gates was in there in an emergency situation playing center. So lots of injuries, and we'll see how the New York Giants respond. But regardless, at year's end, yes, there will be signs of growth. There will be signs of optimism. There will be something to build off of, but we'll see which players are coming back. A lot of that is going to have to do with how this team performs over the final 7 games this year. These players got to continue to play at a high level. However, unlikely it may be with all the injuries around them, it certainly makes it more difficult for players like Barkley, for players like Daniel Jones, and several other players, Julian Love, whoever you want to say, Darius Slayton. But they got to find a way to overcome it and find a way to continue to produce for this football team. It's not going to be easy. We got to get back to our roots. We have to find a way to establish some semblance of a ground game, because you saw yesterday what happens when this team is forced to throw the ball 44 times, when you have limited wide receiver help, when you have 40, 30-mile-an-hour winds. Turnovers, and we can't afford to lose the turnover battle. We just can't. We're not built that way. We'll see how we respond, but I understand it's a really tough Monday. It's hard for me to come on here and talk about the New York Giants when they play as bad as they did, and I love coming on here when it's rainbows and butterflies, but you got to talk about the team when things aren't going well either, and I try to be as honest as I possibly can. I'm down in the dumps. I'm down in the dumps today, but tomorrow we'll rebound and we'll get ready for Dallas, and we'll see how much fight Brian Daboll and this New York Giants squad brings on Thanksgiving. Still looking forward to the game. I still think we could turn this around. I still think we can make the playoffs. It got a lot harder, but this team has done a lot of things this year that I have not expected. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.